Welcome to Good to Know in Buffalo, an informational program presented by the City of Buffalo Office of New Americans. The Office of New Americans in Buffalo is an office in City Hall that was established by Mayor Byron Brown in 2015. The office, or the ONA, works to ensure that Buffalo remains a welcoming city and a preferred resettlement site in the U.S. We make sure that our immigrant communities are highlighted, and our mission is to promote access to city services. With this program, we're able to present information that our city's refugees, immigrants, and residents are looking for. Hello, and welcome to Good to Know in Buffalo, a program of the Office of New Americans. My name is Jessica Lazarin, and I serve as director of the office. Today we are continuing our program on the topic of U.S. taxes. Many members of our immigrant community have come to us with questions about how taxes in the United States work and what their responsibilities are. If you are looking for a presentation on what taxes are and how they are determined, please look for our program called Tax Basics. That is a previous program of the Office of New Americans, and it was a presentation from the local taxpayer advocate office located here in Buffalo. As we continue to learn about the U.S. tax system, today we will be talking to a qualified tax expert about tax scams, fraud, and dishonest practices. Our qualified tax expert today is Mr. Derek Wheeler. Derek, thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure.
Would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am the staff attorney and the qualified tax expert at the Erie County Bar Association Volunteer Lawyers Project. I've been the staff attorney for the VLP's Low Income Taxpayer Clinic for over 3 years. We provide free representation and advice on federal tax issues to low-income and English as a second language taxpayers in Western New York. We are one of 5 pro bono tax clinics in the country, which means the majority of the services we provide are provided by volunteer attorneys in the area.
And when you say that your office provides pro bono services, what does that mean?
Pro bono services means free services. The taxpayer, or the client in this case, is not responsible for paying a fee for the attorney's services.
And the clients that you take, do they have to meet any requirements to become clients so that the services are free?
The only requirement that the clients have to meet is that they have to be income eligible for our services. What that means is that based on the household's income, they have to meet a specific guideline. Our guideline goes up to 250% of the federal poverty level.
Do you have to be a U.S. citizen to pay and file your taxes in the United States?
You do not have to be a U.S. citizen or have any specific legal status to be obligated to file federal or state income taxes. If you earn income in the United States, you are legally obligated to pay tax on that income.
Now, I want to hear a little bit about how you've helped people who were victims of tax scams. Can you talk a little bit about your clients?
Sure. We have about a minority of our clients are either immigrants or refugees, but the vast majority of the immigrant and refugee clients we have fall foul of the IRS because they were victims of either misinformation or scams. I was actually hired, and our funding was increased because in the city of Buffalo, there was a very large tax preparation scam that affected over 1,000 immigrants and refugees, many in the Burmese and Karen communities.
Today, we want our guests to hear about ways to protect themselves from tax fraud and tax scams. Can you first explain to us what is a tax scam?
Yes. In general, a tax scam is any act that is perpetrated to utilize the complex nature of the tax law to steal money or information from unsuspecting victims. The victims of these scams may be random, or they may be targeted in a more direct manner, making the scam look more legitimate, but it is in fact still a scam.
What are some types of scams or fraud that we should be careful to look for?
The main three types of scams I see in my practice are phone call scams, identity theft, and dishonest tax practices.
You mentioned phone scams. Can you give us an example of a phone scam?
Yeah, the most common phone scam, and it's also the most publicized scam, is when a caller gets in touch with an unsuspecting person claiming to be the IRS and demanding immediate payments. They are often incredibly aggressive and will threaten the person's arrest if a payment is not made to them in generally random amounts. Also, another scam involves identity thieves filing a tax return in a person's name, depositing a refund in the person's bank account, and then contacting that person to demand that the refund that was put in the bank account is returned. The scam is particularly alarming because it involves not only the phone scams that we're so accustomed to, but also identity theft, and the callers have a lot of information on the people that they're contacting, including bank account information, addresses, phone numbers, and social security numbers.
Will the IRS ever call you to demand payment over the telephone?
The IRS will never contact you over the phone to demand payments. They contact people via mail almost exclusively to demand payment.
And you talked about identity theft. How does someone steal your identity?
The most common means by which somebody's identity is stolen is over the phone through either coercing or tricking a person into providing information, or over the internet. Oftentimes, retailers, banks, or other institutions that collect this information are subject to hacks, and then people's social security numbers, addresses, and other identifying information is put out into the world to be used by identity thieves.
It sounds like the social security number is really important to keep private. Are there other kinds of information that we should also try to protect?
Well, the social security number certainly is the most important piece of information because it is truly your identity with the government. It is how the government determines if you've earned income, by if income is assigned to your social security number, if you filed a tax return, and also it's how they calculate benefits for Social Security. So that is truly the most important piece of information. However, other pieces of information like bank account information, credit card numbers, are also incredibly important to keep private because it is information that credit reporting agencies and the government uses to verify your identity. So if an identity thief has your social security number but also has other pieces of information like a credit card number or a bank account number, that can further result in harm.
You mentioned dishonest practices. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, the most common dishonest tax practices we see are when tax preparers may put credits or deductions on a person's tax return that they might not be eligible for. And the reason they do this is to increase the refund amount for the taxpayer, because it oftentimes will increase the amount of money they can charge as a fee to the taxpayer, or they will outright steal the refund if they just are very dishonest. So the tax return itself is filed under penalties of perjury. So if any tax return contains a false claim, then that in and of itself, if the taxpayer knows of the false claim, is a crime. So it's very important to make sure the tax return contains the correct information and is truthful to the best of the taxpayer's ability.
So it sounds like an IRS return will allow you to claim credits, and sometimes that could mean that you will get money back from the government for taxes that you paid. Is that correct?
That's correct. The credits can come in two forms, but the most common credit, the Earned Income Tax Credit, is a credit that can result in the government paying you money as opposed to you paying tax, depending on your financial situation.
And so if someone is preparing your tax return and not being honest, is it those tax credits that they use to get payment from the government?
The Earned Income Tax Credit is probably the most commonly used for fraud, just because it is based on the income and it is the highest amount. The other credits that have been used are what are called the additional child tax credit, and also the American Opportunity Credit, which was the credit that was used as part of the tax preparation scam in Buffalo about 5 to 6 years ago.
You've talked about tax credits and how those funds can be used in dishonest practices. What can we do to protect ourselves against that?
The best way to protect yourself is to review the tax return with the tax preparer right after it is prepared. Make sure the tax preparer is able to explain everything that is on the return. If there is something on the return that you did not provide information for, or the tax preparer says, oh, just don't worry about it, then it's very possible that that piece of information is either incorrect or it's been inflated to alter the tax return to the point where it is no longer correct and truthful. It's also in your best interest to get a copy of the tax return after it's been prepared, so you have that information just in case later on the IRS audits that return.
And earlier you also talked about something called refund theft. What is that?
Refund theft is when the dishonest tax preparer will alter the banking information on the tax return to their own or to a financial instrument that they have control over, such as a prepaid debit card, and will steal some or all of the refund from the taxpayer. It's vital that, as I just stated, the taxpayer gets a copy of the return, but also that to make sure that copy has the taxpayer's banking information on it. So once again, if something were to arise where they did not receive the refund, they have the information that they can provide to the IRS to show that they had attempted to file their return and provide their correct banking information.
It sounds like a copy of the return is really important for us to have. How long must we keep the copies of our tax returns? It's in your best interest to keep the copies of the returns for at least 7 years. The time frame by which the IRS will generally audit you, which is to examine the return, look back at it, is only 3 years. But the best case scenario is to have that information because you may need it for other purposes. And in cases such as identity theft, the problems often don't arise until 3, 4, or 5 years later. So if you have a copy of the return, you are in a much better position to show that you were maybe a victim of identity theft, or you can show when the identity theft had occurred to better resolve your situation. So keeping copies of our tax return, protecting our identity information. Do you have any other tips you could share with us for how to protect ourselves?
Yeah, one of the most important things I advise clients of all the time is making sure to file a tax return on time. Even in instances where a taxpayer may owe taxes and at the time not have the ability to pay, it is still in their best interest to file a tax return, because there are certain legal remedies to resolving the tax debt that might not be available to them if they do not file a return or file a return late. Also, it's vital to properly withhold tax on your paycheck if you are an employee, as opposed to paying a lump sum at the end of the year. Withholding properly allows you to pay in small increments throughout the year and decrease the burden you may have at the end of the year if you are going to owe taxes. And we have a lot of clients that unfortunately were given misinformation or bad advice and do not withhold properly, and it results in large balances owed, and they then do not have the money to pay those balances.
In our earlier program, we heard from a representative from the Taxpayer Advocate Service, and they offered different assistance for the community. Is your office, how does someone get in contact with your office to get help?
Somebody would just have to call our main number. either myself or one of our staff members would reach back out to them. We also provide language assistance through Language Line or interpreters in our office in different languages. So anybody who is either an English speaker or a non-English speaker or a limited English speaker would be able to meet with us, and we'd go through their situation to see if we could provide any assistance.
What are the categories of assistance that your office provides?
In general, we provide free civil legal services in a variety of issues. Myself provides legal representation and advice in federal tax issues. You know, the three main categories of that being federal tax audits, where the IRS is reviewing a returns information, and the person may need legal representation to ensure that the IRS properly verifies their information, where a person owes a balance or a federal tax debt but does not have the ability to fully pay that debt, and that can be for any number of reasons, or where a person claims a refund and for some reason they do not receive the full refund amount or they receive no refund at all. Those are generally the three main types of federal disputes that we deal with.
Derek, is there anything else you'd like to share with our community?
Just going back to identity theft, it's just protect your social security number and protect your children's social security numbers, because the ill effects of identity theft can last for 5, 10, 15 years, and I don't believe anybody wants that for themselves or for their family.
Thank you. We're thankful for the work that you do and for the work that your office does. Thank you for joining the Office of New Americans today. We hope that you've learned a lot from today's program. My name is Jessica Lazarin. Please learn more about the ONA at the City of Buffalo website. Thanks for watching.